Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm David Elwood, the Dean of the Kennedy School, and I'm extremely glad to be here tonight. And I'm really thrilled to have all of you here on a lovely Friday afternoon. The weather, of course, in Cambridge is always this way, and glad to have you here. It's also my special pleasure to welcome Anthony Williams here back to the Kennedy School. He's a graduate of our school. I'll leave it to others to describe his remarkable accomplishments, but again, it's a great honor. But the real pleasure here is that this conference is taking place and that all of you have come and joined us. And it's an opportunity for students and alumni and community leaders and a variety of others to get together and talk about the variety of very important issues that affect the African diaspora and others. And so this is a terrific event, and frankly, it's essential to the mission of the Kennedy School, and something that, as I become Dean of the Kennedy School just since July, is central to the kinds of things that we want to do. So I'm very, very happy to be a part of this and very proud to be here. I also want to welcome back all those alumni that, along with the mayor, have participated in various ways in the life of this school. It's very exciting, and you know, it's an interesting day for other reasons too. Today's the day when newly admitted students come. And so I literally came from a reception for students of color to here, and I go to yet another event. In fact, I'll have to leave after the introduction, sadly, for other of these things, but I'll join you tomorrow. And so it's especially, I'm happy to see our future in the eyes of the further out future and the current future here today. This conference builds on the school's efforts in a variety of ways, but what really is going on is a group of students, some of whom are represented here, got together and decided this was important. And the kind of enthusiasm and the energy that they generated and the energy and reception they've received has turned this into something really quite extraordinary. I'm joined on the stage here by Nicole Campbell and Queen Narissa Quinn. I'm terrible with names, as you'll discover. My wife is occasionally misspoken. But my job is only to introduce Nicole, and I did okay with Nicole. And she's a second-year MPP student and this year's conference chair. Now, she really is a true KSG student. Many of you may remember PAEs. Either you did them or you saw other people suffering with them. And a PAE is kind of like a master's thesis in your second year. Well, the thing to understand is Nicole was really one of the driving forces behind this whole thing. You can imagine the work and energy and that had to go into it. And PAEs were like just due when? Friday? Yeah, last Tuesday. So, yes, this Tuesday. Okay, so there you go. And so just a couple of things in her life going on. And by the way, her PAE was entitled The Role of Education and Development and the Evaluation of Adult and Supplementary Education Programs in the Dominican Republic. And she did, in fact, complete it. I'm sure it's terrific. And so here's the pitch. Now, because she's been doing these things, she hasn't looked for a job yet. She is unbelievable. Someone in this audience should hire Nicole, and you will be glad you did. So with those words of welcome and gratitude to all of you, let me turn it over to Nicole Campbell. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Kennedy School alumni, students, administration, faculty, public service leaders, colleagues, Mayor Williams, and honored guests. My name is Nicole Campbell, and as conference chair, I would like to welcome you to the first annual Harvard Black Policy Conference. We have come very far to make it here today, to acknowledge the accomplishments of our Black alumni, to set the stage at the Kennedy School of Government to grapple with issues that affect our diverse community, to inspire ourselves to act, to engage, and to reflect on those actions. Creating this conference and bringing it here to you today has been itself a journey that started over a year ago. It began with this question: how do we begin to meaningfully discuss the multitude of issues affecting the African diaspora in a way that allows us to build bridges across the boundaries that currently exist? This is how we began the conference. as a question to fellow students who share the same concerns. We soon realized that Kennedy School of Government Black alumni were our strong base, our untapped potential for sustained action, the continuum that could give life to this type of initiative. So now I would like to take a moment to give a warm welcome to our Black alumni. Moreover, Helene Daniels, the director of the Master in Public Policy program, became our confidant and linked to realizing the success of this conference. She demonstrated unmatched commitment to our pursuits simply because she believed in the idea and I believe in our abilities to execute. So thank you, Helene. Additionally, we have lots of sponsors, which I'm going to go through pretty quickly. Institute of Politics, Enrollment Services, the Dean's Office, Alumni Programs, Julius Babbitt, MPA 2001, Helene Daniels, Ray Jefferson, MPA, MBA 1998, Mr. Flash Wiley, MPP JD, not JP, 74, the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy, the Center for Public Leadership, the Hauser Center for Nonprofits, the Master in Public Policy Program, Melvin Terry, MPA 96, the Center for International Development, Nana Ofobike, Jerome Holmes. Now I would like to take a moment, just lots of thanks, it's our first one, to introduce our steering committee. We have Nana Ofobike, can you stand? Where is she? She's gone. Erica McKnight, Olu Arowolo, Geraldine Richard, Queen Narissa Quinn, and Monica Rodriguez. Today, we're excited again to present the Black Policy Conference. Saturday is filled with 7 dynamic panels that will focus on higher education, investing in African and Caribbean nations, healthcare policy in African diaspora, economic development in our communities, Black political involvement, the role of African nations in global politics, and the finale workshop on redefining Black leadership in the 21st century. Saturday will commence with a breakfast opportunity with the Ambassador of South Africa, Barbara Masakela, and will end with Cheryl Dorsey, the president of the Echoing Green Foundation and an MPP alum, to serve as the keynote speaker for our banquet event. Following that, on Sunday, we will have inspirational words from our world-renowned international motivational speaker, Les Brown. Our charge for you throughout this weekend is to begin to build networks, to learn from your colleagues, coordinate strategies that affect the African diaspora, and work to develop strategies to improve action and research channels at Harvard and beyond, how we can better and make a more coordinated effort. And now the next steps are up to you. Again, welcome to the inaugural Harvard Black Policy Conference. And now I'd like to take the chance to introduce Queen, who will introduce the Honorable Mayor Williams.
Good evening. Tonight I have the honor and the privilege of introducing the Honorable Mayor Anthony Williams. During his first term in office, Mayor Williams and his administration helped spark a virtual renaissance in Washington, D.C. Through citizen summits and town hall meetings, he created an environment conducive to addressing the needs of district citizens. During his tenure, Mayor Williams restored fiscal accountability to the city and generated economic stability. In his distinguished public service career, Mayor Williams has exemplified the qualities of innovative and effective leadership, serving as the first CFO for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Deputy State Comptroller of Connecticut, and as an elected member of the New Haven Board of Aldermen. Mayor Williams graduated with a joint degree from the Kennedy School of Government and Harvard Law School. I recall during his earlier visit this spring when he encouraged students to commit to public service, especially at the state and local level. It is this call to leadership that inspires us to use our abilities towards the greater good. It is with great admiration and respect that I introduce to you the Honorable Mayor Anthony Williams.
Thank you all very much. It's really great to be here at the Kennedy School again. And when you're a mayor, sometimes you develop an inferiority complex, and when you're invited again to a place, you certainly welcome that. and when you can come to some place where the grass is greener and you can really speak your mind in a way that maybe you can't in your home territory, it's something that you deeply appreciate. And I want to thank our panelists here for their hard work on this and for bringing me here, and their hard work in really organizing and staging this inaugural public policy, black public policy events. We should give them a big hand and acknowledge them. Really have done a great job, Nicole. And also I want to please convey to Ambassador Masekela my best wishes. We've gotten to know one another and have worked on projects together. What I want to do is just share with you, my understanding of the state of our cities in the context of Black America, and give you just a little bit of background on my own city, and then talk about leadership from that perspective. If I could do that, I certainly appreciate that. And then we can leave some time for questions and answers. And I'm hoping that we can get a copy of this, and I can put this on the web back in Washington, D.C. as well. And we can put this on our government access channel so more people can see this, because this is an important topic. Leadership, Black public policy, leadership in Black America, for the reasons I'll outline to you. Let me just share with you, the National Urban League examined the equality gaps between blacks and whites in its 2005 report on the state of Black America. They found that despite societal gains, the overall status of African Americans is just 73% of their white counterparts in health, income, education, and housing. Now, obviously, this status quo has to be changed. I'm sure you would all agree. And I believe it's going to be up to Black policymakers from the Kennedy School and from across the country to help bridge this serious divide. Now, you take my own city, there's a serious divide in my own city. My own city, the city of Washington, D.C. is really kind of part and parcel of the history of cities across the country, and I say this wherever I go, and for those of you who've heard me speak before, I know you're saying, oh, he's going to talk about the cycle of cities, but it's important to mention, because in my mind, mayors like me are fighting to do something very important, and what is that? That's to get their cities on the map in a global new economy, whether it's technology economy. I'm not sure. People say, well, it's not technology anymore. Whatever it is, it's not industrial. So in this post-industrial economy, this global economy, how do we get our cities back on the map, growing again with sustainable economies? How do we do this? When you cut through all the fog and you boil and reduce everything down, how do we do that? Look at the stages of American cities. My wife is from St. Louis. I was formerly, up until Sunday, a St. Louis Cardinals fan. I'm now a Washington Nationals fan. But St. Louis is a great example. City of St. Louis, from the Lewis and Clark expedition all the way up through the World's Fair in 1904, all the way up to the Great Depression, exploded in population. A huge, vibrant, robust city. And then from the Great Depression through World War II, you're in basically a status quo. Then from 1950 to year 2000, St. Louis lost half its population. So you had this huge movement from the farms into the industrial stage, huge growth of the population. Then from 1950 to 2000, the city loses half its population because of federal subsidies, racial distancing, all the reasons we know of now, suburbanization. City lost half its population. So the city of St. Louis and cities across the country like Washington, D.C. are struggling to get themselves back on the map. Now, coincidental with this in Washington, D.C., there's another movement afoot, and this is all important information for you to understand how I would define leadership from my perch in Washington, D.C. The other history that's moving concurrent with this is the history of Washington, D.C. If you had to pick a capital of the United States, and you had to pick a capital of the United States, and you had to compromise between pro-slavery and anti-slavery, strong federal government, weak federal government, power of the, they didn't have corporations, and power of the elites versus power of the people in this Jeffersonian model. And you had to do it and locate it on a river. If you did all that geographically, you'd end up in where Washington, D.C. is. Right? So it was decided we're going to have a new capital in Washington, D.C., in 1800. But before we move the capital to Washington, D.C. in 1800, we're going to stop in Philadelphia while they're building the new capital. And as every federal project went, there were all kinds of problems with building the Capitol. L'Enfant was arguing with Washington, then he was arguing with Jefferson. Everybody argued with Jefferson. He ended up leaving. As it turned out, an African-American surveyor, Benjamin Banneker, actually implemented the original L'Enfant plan. So if you drive to Washington, D.C. and you get trapped in one of the circles for 30 or 40 years, you're actually witnessing, living the L'Enfant plan as it was executed by Benjamin Banneker. But it took time for this plan to be realized. And let me also say, incidentally, this plan really spoke to the founders of the country with an ambition to be a world power. If you really delve back into the history of Washington, D.C. and the plan for the city, this was not a plan for the city that was just a plan for a little country that happened to have broken away from England and just wanted to kind of just move along and, you know, catch as catch can. This was a plan for a country that planned on being a world power. The entire city was situated as if it were the center of the universe. You know, I was visiting Beijing, and we were looking at the ancient plans for the city of Beijing, and in the plans for the city of Beijing, there was chaos, and then there was order under the imperial emperor, and the Forbidden City was literally, in the conception of this plan, the center of the universe, likewise with Washington, D.C. So this was a city with huge aspirations, a country with huge aspirations. Now I'll get to my punchline in a second. So the capital of the country was in Philadelphia. While the capital of the country was in Philadelphia, there was, after every war, the veterans always wanted to be paid their proper benefits, right? And up until the end of World War II, basically veterans at the end of every war were given a lunch ticket and a gold watch, and that was it. They had no retirement, they had no health benefits, they had no nothing, right? So the veterans were very upset, so they organized a run on the legislature at the time. The folks running the legislature called to Pennsylvania for help. People in Pennsylvania basically said, hey, we agree with the protesters. So it was decided that when we move down to Washington, D.C., we're going to put the city completely under the federal government because we want to insulate the Congress from local, parochial concerns. Now, as I'll get to in a second, just the reverse has happened, because what's happened is that when we planned this city, we moved to Washington, D.C., and we put it under federal power, like so much in the founding days of our country, we were going to get to things, right? So for example, all persons are created equal, the Declaration of Independence. If you read all the Federalist Papers and you read a lot of the writings of the founders, they all say we're going to get to slavery later, right? Well, Washington, D.C. was one of these things we're going to get to later. If you read a lot of the original folks who created the Capitol and created this country, they knew it was unjust that the people in Washington, D.C. would be completely under federal power and would have no vote for president or for Congress, but they were going to get to that later. Problem is they never got to it, and they still haven't gotten to it. So Washington, D.C. is a city where we have the 6th highest casualty rate in the United States. In all the wars fought in the United States, we pay the 2nd or 3rd high, I guess 2nd now, highest income tax per capita of citizens in the United States, and do not have a voting member of Congress. Now, this is very important as I talk about leadership. The city has a rich Civil War history. The city has a rich history of race, immersed as it was in the Civil War, immersed as it was in the fight for emancipation, the fight for voting rights, the fight for accommodations, the fight for business opportunities, the fight for this, fight for everything, can all be seen in the history of Washington, D.C. And this all overlays this history of American cities. So as many cities across the country were declining in population and declining in position and declining in stature, so was Washington, D.C. And as Washington, D.C. Declined in stature and position and economic vitality, another strange thing happened that relates to black policy, and I'm going to try to get back to this as well, and that is, peculiar thing in Washington, D.C. is that a huge part, well, the way to think about it is from the period of around mid-60s to mid-80s, there was created in Washington, D.C. a very solid African-American middle class. The first modern mayor of Washington, D.C., everybody says I'm the fourth mayor of Washington, D.C., I'm the fourth modern mayor. There were mayors in Washington, D.C. all through the 19th century up until around the end of the Civil War when there was appointed a man by the name of Eugene Shepard, now affectionately known as Boss Shepard, who was a territorial governor. If you look at modern Washington and all the trees and monuments and everything you see, a lot of the basic infrastructure was put in by Boss Shepard. He was a great mayor in terms of infrastructure. He wasn't so great in terms of ethics and procurement, so he was thrown out. And believe me, if you were thrown out on ethics charges in the late 19th century during the Grant administration, you really had to be doing, you know what I mean? Because this was not exactly a high period for American ethics. So anyway, he was thrown out, but God love him. So the commission ruled the city. The commission ruled the city right until the height of the civil rights movement, where, as some of you know, President Johnson brought in Mayor Washington as the first appointed governor. Then first appointed mayor, even though we are a governor if we were a state, but first appointed mayor, and then President Nixon had legislation passed that actually provided for the election of the mayor. The long and short of it is that the first modern elected mayor of the city, Walter Washington, deserves a lot of credit for helping to create a black middle class. Marion Barry deserves a huge amount of credit for creating an African-American middle class. But my friend Marion Barry, and he would disagree with me on this, is also partly or largely responsible, I would say, for the loss of the African-American middle class when they moved out to Prince George's County and Montgomery County. Very peculiar, because in most cities, your exodus from the city was largely white flight. In Washington, D.C., a substantial part of the flight from the city were African Americans. But another peculiar thing happens in the city, which also further complicates. Nothing's easy in life, and everything's complicated in Washington. What further complicates is that even though everybody moved out, a lot of people still work in the city. Washington, D.C. has the highest influx, or second highest influx of commuters in the United States that come in and work during the day. And our government has a high influx of commuters because, unlike every other city in the country, I am prohibited from introducing, and the Congress was prohibited from passing legislation that would mandate a residency requirement. Now, you may think it's common sense that someone who works for your city actually lives in your city. So I spent all this time trying to get people to answer the phones. Obviously, if more people lived in the city, they'd want to answer the phones because, they may be answering the phone of a sister, a neighbor, a brother, someone they know. It's much harder when you have this requirement where 60% of your workers don't live in your city. So very, very, very peculiar. And the point here is that people vote with their feet, people make choices, people seek opportunities, regardless of whether they're white or they're African American or Latino or anything else. So you've got these two things happening. You've got this flight out of cities. You've got the city of Washington, D.C. with its own peculiar problems. And I'm abbreviating this brutally to get to my major point about leadership, but I'm trying to give you some context. By 1995, the city had slid into insolvency. A lot of problems facing the city. One of the problems facing the city and contributing to this problem with bankruptcy was the fact that the city, when it was given home rule, wasn't given all the tools of home rule. So the long and short of it is, and the way to think about this is let's pretend all of you are a restaurant, okay? Now, in a normal restaurant, I would try to spread my costs across all of the patrons of the restaurant as I serve all of you your delicious menu, right? But in Washington, D.C., I can't do that. In Washington, D.C., I'm prohibited from levying a commuter tax, and half of my property is off limits. The way to think about it is basically half of my tax base is off limits to me by virtue of federal law. So what does that mean? That means that essentially I have to serve all the commuters who come into the city, right? All the people who come into the city, I have to serve them, even if they're not paying anything for that service. So to get to the restaurant analogy, I have to serve everybody in the restaurant, but I can only charge half of you. So what does that mean? It means that half of you are going to be upset because you're paying double for your food, and all of you are going to be upset because I'm trying to spread the cost of the food over too many people and the food isn't as good as it could otherwise be. That's a problem I face in Washington, D.C. I get on the radio, someone calls me and they go, you need to fix those roads, blah, 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 blah. And I always say, at first I didn't say, first I just answer the question. Now that I've become seasoned, I always say, well, where are you from, sir? And they go, well, I'm from Maryland. Well, okay, you know. So you're sitting here complaining about the food. Do you pay for it? No, but you're going to complain anyway. So that's a problem that I face. There was huge pension liability. We had, you all know about Medicaid match. We are given all the burdens of a state without any of the benefits of a state. So in other words, we have all the burdens and obligations of a state. We have to pay a Medicaid match, for example, but in Washington, D.C., up until a couple of years ago, the Medicaid match in Washington, D.C. was 50-50. Imagine that. We were given, yes, home rule by the federal government. We were given a personnel system and a retirement system by the federal government, but was unfunded. Up until about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a $4 billion unfunded pension liability. To talk about an iceberg in front of the Titanic. So there are a number of different factors. There were these factors in terms of this relationship with the federal government. There were factors in terms of flight out of the city for all the reasons I mentioned. And frankly, there was a lot of bad management and a lot of risk aversion by people who were running the government that led the city to the point where in 1995, we had about $500 million in debt. Now, fast forward. Now, the good news is now we're a city with $1.2 billion surplus, $200 million surplus. Washington, D.C. has the highest cash reserve if we were a state, of any state in the United States. We have about $400 million in cash reserve. Huge cumulative fund balance, gone from junk bond rating, AA investment grade rating. We've gone from being laughingstock in terms of government operations. People actually come now to see how we've done government operations. People not, I'll give you an example. I was here at the Kennedy School about 3-4 months ago, and someone was complaining because our performance measures on the web were 4 months out of date. Now, all of you who've been in Washington, D.C. over the last 10 years know that if our problem is that our performance measures on the web are 4 months out of date, we've come a long way, right? Because 7, 8 years ago, we didn't have a web, we didn't have any performance measures, we didn't have anything, all right? So we're making a lot of headway, You take public safety, a lot of headway in public safety. But let me stop with public safety and get to my major point. Public safety is a great example. The economy is a great example. I'll give you 2 facts. In the economy in Washington, D.C., we've brought $27 billion of investment to the city over the last 7 years or so. $27 billion of investment. We have the strongest tourist economy now in the United States, strongest office economy now in the United States, and I'm very, very proud of that. What I'm not proud of is the fact that I have created, compared to other cities across the country, more jobs than just about all the other cities in the country over the last 5 or 6 years. I'm very proud of that. Peculiar thing happening, though, a lot of peculiar things happening here. As jobs have increased over the last 5 or 6 years, unemployment has increased at the same time. And what that tells you is there's a tremendous disconnect between the jobs, that are available and folks who can fill those jobs. There's a huge set of issues there. And another statistic that's very compelling for you. Crime 2 years ago went down 8%. Crime last year went down 18%. Those are big drops in crime. Homicide is at its lowest rate in something like 30, 35 years. So I'm very, very proud of that. All the naysayers who were saying nothing's happened, things haven't happened, blah, blah, blah. Crime's definitely on the way down, definitely moving in the right direction. Very, very proud of that. But youth homicide is actually at its highest point in 10, 15 years. And this is actually happening in cities across the country. And it's acutely happening here. Youth homicide. So what this is telling you is what? When you have jobs increasing, unemployment's increasing, when you have crime overall going down, but youth homicide going up, to me, those are the parakeet, in the mind. They're telling you that there's a serious underlying problem still in the city. And indeed, there is a city. As I've stated many, many times in many, many different forms, in your nation's capital, and let me say incidentally, you should care about what happens in Washington, D.C., because this is your nation's capital. So all the things I'm talking to you about, you should think of as some of your problems because this is your capital. You should care about the fact that people in your nation's capital can't vote for a voting member of Congress. You should care about what's happening in Washington, D.C., in all the areas I'm mentioning. And what's happening here is that you have a population that is very well educated. I have the most educated population by one set of statistics in the United States. I'll give you another statistic. 40% of my city is reading at a third grade level. 40% is reading at a third grade level. On one set of measures, I have the richest population in the country. Another set of measures, I have the highest concentration of poverty in the United States. Now, I mention all that to give you context. I mention all that to tell you that there's a need for bold, innovative leadership. And as I've shared with the people in my city, I have analogized it. I always use a lot of simple analogies, which you tend to do when you're mayor. Get out of the restaurant, now we're out on a mountain. We're climbing this mountain. Yeah, we're out, we just overpaid for our food, now we're out on the mountain. We're climbing this mountain, and the first stage is, the full faith and credit of the government, settled expectations of the government. If you can't pay your bills and there are no settled expectations, you're not going to go anywhere. Got that done. Next stage is, can the government actually plow the snow, run the trains on time? I believe we're getting that done. We're not completely there, but we're definitely getting there, getting that done. Next stage is, can you bring investment to your city? Getting that done. Next stage, can you bring crime down in your city? Getting that done. But you'll notice as you get through each of these successive challenges, the slope gets higher and higher and higher. And now we have a situation where the greatest challenges in my city are ahead of me. Why? Because now I'm talking about the challenge of education. And now I'm talking about the challenge of actually providing support for people, whether they're ex-offenders, mothers trying to enter the world of work, children who need to move from shelter to foster care, from foster care to adoption, all these things happening. And another peculiar thing is going on. Well, I'll give you a story about this. And Marion knows I would tell this to him. And Marion Berry is a good friend of mine. I'm going to use him as an example. You want two examples of leadership? They're right here in Washington, D.C. Two examples of African-American leadership right in Washington, D.C., live as I speak. One example is my friend Marion Berry, right? And the anti-Berry is Tony Williams, and anti-Tony is Marion. I mean, you couldn't find two more opposite styles of leadership from one point of view than former Mayor Marion Berry. Am I right, Flash? You got to be, am I right? Right. Marion Berry and Tony Williams. Not a lot of similarity in terms of style. And to tell you what someone like me is dealing with, I'm giving you my frustrations, okay, as an African-American politician. I'm going to speak directly to you because I really feel strongly about this. Okay, I go to this, I go to the RFK playground. Okay, we go to open up the new RFK playground. The RFK playground had been a disaster for 10, 15, 20 years. Now I'm mayor, we got the government back on its feet, we're refunding the playgrounds and the rec centers. We've built a brand new, beautiful RFK playground. And we're sitting here at the ceremony. Okay, now, and you have to understand, my friend Marion was mayor for 16 years. Okay? Mayor for 16 years. So all these things I'm talking about didn't happen in 1998 when I became mayor. I'm not one to shirk responsibility, but on the other hand, let's look at this in total context, okay? So, here we are sitting at the opening of the RFK playground. Ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce Jack Evans, Councilman of Ward 2, supporter of the new playground. And ladies and gentlemen, we're now introducing Mayor Tony Williams, who is responsible for building the beautiful new RFK playground. And now we're going to introduce former Mayor and Councilman Marion Berry, who's not in any elected position, doesn't live in Ward 2, and parenthetically you could argue, ran the playground into the ground. Yay! Standing ovation, standing ovation. That's the most frustrating thing. I got people who follow me around. Protesting what I haven't done for the poor of Washington, D.C., okay? And there's one group that follow me around talking about what I haven't done for the homeless in the city. And they follow me around. Till one night, when you're in public office, as many of you know, you tend to eat late. So then you can't sleep well because you ate late, because you're in that REM zone for too long. So I'm lying down in the bed and I'm just bumping in the REM zone, boom, da boom, da boom, da boom, just like a bumpy car on a dirt road, just on and on. I can't sleep. And all of a sudden I'm going through one kind of, how you go through different, they're kind of like trailers before the main dream. So I'm going through different. So I finally get to the main dream, and the main dream, I can't believe it. I was like, you're disgusted in your sleep. the main dream was these protesters were following me around in my dream. Until finally, you try to bust out of a dream, and I finally busted out of the dream, and I said, "Get the hell out of here!" But I realized I was yelling, "Get the hell out of here," next to my wife, and my wife looks up, and my wife, Diane, says, "Boy, you need to take a break, okay?" So, there's this notion that because of how I look, how I dress, how I speak, that I'm somehow or another detached and removed, unconcerned with, indifferent from the needs of the African American community. And it's really about placing too much emphasis on style, not enough emphasis on substance. Okay, I can talk to you, I could sit and I can have a discussion with you. I could talk to you, give you a beautiful vision, talk very poetically and romantically about some of the great trains of the world. But that doesn't mean I can run the trains, okay? I can talk to you great about the needs of the people and how the people need to uplift themselves and reach a new horizon and blah, 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 blah. But does that mean that I'm, for example, for the first time funding these human services programs in a way they never were before? Does this mean that just because I can talk about them well, that I have actually taken probably 3/4 of the human service programs of the city out of receivership? How much good can you do for someone if 3/4 of your human service capacity is in receivership? Who are you serving? So what I'm saying here is that, one, in terms of policy in the African American community, I would really urge us to be much more skeptical consumers in terms of style over substance. And the second thing I would urge us to be is I'd urge us to be just more skeptical, period. Because in my mind, and I'm not going to recite all of American history. I try to give you a little bit of history as it relates to American cities. I'll give you an example. The Community Development Block Grant Program. Right now I'm president of the National League of Cities. Everybody's all in uproar. Everybody wants to declare DEFCON 4 and everything because of presidents to cut a lot of the Community Development Block Grant funding. And I actually think it's wrong to cut the Community Development Block Grant funding. But having said that, I've worked with the Community Development Block Grant as a mayor. I worked with it as a CFO. I worked with it when I was at the BRA. I worked with it when I was running the development agency in St. Louis. And I can tell you this Community Development Block Grant program is not the greatest program in the world. So we ought to be open to some new approaches. And we shouldn't get locked into ideological or party labels. I use another analogy, another simple analogy. If you're lost, they always tell you in the Scouts, wait, right, for help. Yeah, that's true, but damn, if you're waiting 4 or 5 weeks, 10 years, 20 years, you got to start looking for some help. And I think we need to be more skeptical. Style over substance, we need to be more skeptical in terms of labels. And Lord, we need to be a little more sensitive and appreciative of people who are willing to take risks. And I'll just wrap up on this. Okay, right now in the city, there's this whole new emerging thing. Everybody in the city, there's some new people want to be mayor. They all decided that they want to be mayor, and they want me to get out of the way and declare that I'm not running so they can run. And I'm saying, if you're so bad, why do you need me to get out of the way for you to run? That's ridiculous, right? Why do you need, when I was CFO of the city, and the reason why I'm actually one of the few candidates in the United States who can actually say that I actually went through a draft campaign and a write-in campaign. To show you that, I always tell people that, I've made my own mistakes as mayor, right? I got my own skeletons. I always say, I got so many skeletons, I need a walk-in closet. That's how many skeletons I got, okay? So I've made mistakes as a mayor. One of them was, I wake up on my birthday 3 years ago or 2 years ago, whenever it was, and can you imagine what it's like to be running unopposed, okay? Here you are running unopposed. You got about $3 million in the bank, and you are not on the ballot. Can you imagine how humiliated you feel? That's like Michael Jordan, as I going for a layup, no one around, and he misses the layup. It is really embarrassing, really embarrassing. So I'm not saying I am without sin. I'm not saying I haven't made any mistakes. But she had all these chihuahuas, this is on TV, but she had all these guys sitting here just nipping and carping about what they want to do and what they want to do. And one of my problems is that they're all saying that, well, I want to be mayor of the city, and I'm going to be mayor of the city, and I'm going to achieve what Tony Williams has, but I'm going to do it without dividing the city, because Tony Williams has been divisive. And I just say that that's impossible. You cannot be a mayor, you cannot be an elected official. You certainly can't be an elected official in an urban environment, in an African-American public policy setting, without taking some risks. This is not a zone for the risk-averse, ladies and gentlemen. And I would argue to you that the reason why the city is where it is because we have taken risks. And we need, folks, I think, need to understand that if you're going to talk about leadership, you need to distinguish between, get back to the restaurant. 80% of the time, I'm taking your orders, okay? Now, you want steak, maybe I don't think you should have steak. Maybe I think your cholesterol's too high. Maybe I talked to your doctor and you got a heart problem, and I don't really think you should have steak. You want steak, you got the steak. You want it medium, you want it well, however you want it, I'm gonna give you your steak. But 20% of the time, if I believe it's in your long-term interest not to have steak, I'm gonna give you asparagus. And you may hate me for it, and maybe you'll throw me out for it, right? But I'm gonna give you asparagus. Now, when I give you the asparagus, I'm hoping that you'll appreciate the asparagus by the time the next election comes around, right? I'm not gonna be stupid, but I'm gonna give you the asparagus. I'll give you two prime examples of where this issue comes into play. One is with the schools. If I talk about number of jobs is increasing, right, and unemployment is increasing, you got a problem with your schools. What is the biggest problem I hear about as mayor, and what is the biggest complaint I hear about? It's the schools. Now, right now, my role in the schools is I catch the javelins and I write the checks, and I've tried twice to take control of the schools, because to me, it's a ludicrous management configuration to have someone with all the responsibility without any authority. All of you are students of management. That makes absolutely no sense. Especially doesn't make any sense when the schools are talking about major need for capital funding. I've got the libraries asking me for more funding, the rec centers asking more funding. All these capital facilities need more funding. Wouldn't it make sense to have all this capital planning integrated in one place? And then you've got to take into account the fact that you've got children with very special needs. About 70%, 80% of the children are receiving free or reduced lunch, which tells you that many children are in a distressed situation in terms of their home environment. That means they need the government and the community to act in what I call in loco parentis, because the family isn't really there. Well, if you have to do all that heavy lifting, doesn't it make sense to have that one point of accountability? The public, in its infinite wisdom through its counsel, has now told me twice no. So I got to work with a system and with the cards I've been dealt, but I can't say I think it's the best system, because it isn't. It really isn't. Every day I talk to the schools want more money. I talked to them 4 weeks ago, they needed $20 million. Another week, they need $40 million more dollars. I have no idea. It's like you're building a bridge, you know you need the bridge, but we're never hitting bottom with this foundation. It's just very, very frustrating. Now, I've been held accountable by the public for going out there asking to take control of the schools, because this is another example of how Tony Williams is indifferent to the needs of the people, and frankly, Tony Williams doesn't understand the needs of the black community, and so on and so on and so forth, because I wanted to take over the schools. Why, you might ask, well, why is this true? Well, because you get back to the history of Washington, D.C., and I can understand this. The school board was a first elected board, the school board was a first elected body in the city, so it's very important to people. I understand that. All I'm saying is we need to get beyond that, because the education of our children and the economic empowerment that comes from that is that much more important. I understand the problem, but we got to get beyond it. Another final issue. Talk about carrying the cross. Another cross I'll carry till the day I'm hit by a truck is I close a public hospital. Now, here we had a public hospital hemorrhaging money, and we had a system in Washington, D.C., where if you were poor in the city, the way you got health care, you had to be near death and then go wait 3 hours in a lousy emergency room in a hospital to get your health care. And what I said was, why don't we stop this? Why don't we take the money we're spending on this hospital, give more people insurance, and allow them to go to the hospital of their choice and allow them to get a regular plan, health plan as part of an HMO, so they can have a regular checkup. And as I always say, they can complain about their HMO the same way we complain about our HMOs, but at least they're treated like regular people. And you know what's happened from this? Emergency room visits have gone down, clinic visits have gone up, checkups have gone up, a lot of health indices are going in the right direction, and I'm very, very proud of that. And we now have in Washington, D.C., if we were treated as a state, more people insured than any other state in the country, because we're taking that money, using it for a good, legitimate purpose. But to most of the people, if you go to southeast part of Washington, D.C., do you agree with what the mayor did with the public hospital? No, close the hospital, blah, 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 blah. You hear all the negative, horrible things about Tony Williams. And I'll tell you another thing I did, is we had a control board at the time. And the control board actually wanted to close the hospital. And I actually had the choice of joining with the council and just politicking it, saying, well, you know what, I think we should keep the hospital. This evil control board is closing the hospital, and, you know, stood behind the apron of the control board. I made a conscious decision I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to do that for two reasons. One is because I think people, me of all people, look at me. I mean, the reason why I was brought through the electoral process to lead the city is because people wanted a different way of doing things, right? So what was the point of me being here if I were going to do things the same old way? And the second was this sense of urgency I talked about, which talked about looking at new opportunities, looking at new approaches, being more skeptical, because it is really, really important. And I'll wrap up with this, and it goes to the heart of what I'm saying in terms of looking at our leaders in the African American community. And as I say all this, again, I mean no offense to my friend Marion Berry, because I was saying to the dean just a moment ago, and to our student leaders here, you know, he actually did a lot better governing than he's given credit for. I've actually done a lot better politicking than I've been given credit for. People say, well, the mayor doesn't know anything about politics. I've been elected mayor twice. I must know something, you know what I mean? So, I mean, you can take these stereotypes too far. But again, to speak to this issue of, you know, how we treat our leadership, what we expect of our leadership, is a really, really important question. A lot of people say, well, the mayor is, you know, he must have come from some aristocratic family because he went to Yale and Harvard, and, you know, he speaks as he does, and blah, 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 blah. You know, I always tell people, I say, you know what? I come from a noble family. I do. I come from a noble family. It's not a noble family because of where they're from. It's not a noble family because of their breeding. It's not a noble family for any of those reasons. It's a nobility of hard work and initiative and sacrifice. And I always tell this story about my father. My father, you know, I love my father. He never believed I was elected mayor, incidentally. But anyway, this man was decorated Army officer in World War II. Okay. He was a captain in World War II, got 2 Bronze Stars in World War II, was actually in combat in World War II. If you were an African American in World War II or a captain in World War II and got 2 Bronze Stars, you probably were downgraded. You probably got Silver Star, right? So he was huge, huge achievement. He had to come back to this country, see the Nazi prisoners of war treated better than he and his colleagues were. The only job he could get when he came back to the country was he worked in the post office. So he worked in the post office, and he had to scrounge together with my mother, find out ways to entertain the family. And one of the things that he always did to entertain us is he took us out to the desert, and there wasn't anything in the desert, but we went out there. You know, we spent a lot of time at the beach because he worked on the swing shift. So what he did, he was a very smart guy. He took all the kids to we're talking about 7 kids. He took all the kids to the beach, and while we were playing at the beach, he slept, you know, so he was ready for, you know, work that night. Now, my sister and I practically drowned once while he was asleep, but that's okay. He took us to the beach. But one of the things he always did is he always took us to the airport. I remember going to the airport. I remember watching all those old prop planes and all the stars getting on the planes, and then the jets came in, and that shows how old I am, and all the smoke from the jets. And we were all disappointed when they put the shields up so you couldn't get the cars blasted and everything from all the smoke and all. That was very, very exciting. But even though it was all exciting for kids, we were always wondering, why is he taking us to the airport? And then it finally dawned on me, you know, about 3 or 4 months ago, my wife and I were in LA and we were flying back home to Washington, D.C., and I almost started crying. And you know why? Because I looked out of the plane and I saw that spot where we were standing 45 years ago, and I just had this incredible feeling because I realized what my father was saying in his own way, because he wasn't very talkative. This guy made about 2-3 phone calls his entire life. He wasn't very talkative, but he was saying in his own way, you know what, I'm never going to be on this plane, but you kids are going to be on this plane. And that's what we've got to be about in leadership and in government. We've got to be giving every family the opportunity to say to their kids, you know what, I may not do what I'm showing you, but because of what I'm doing, you're going to be able to do it. You're going to be able to dream dreams and live out hopes that I could only dream of right now. And that's great, and that's what we've got to be about. Because Washington, D.C. ultimately isn't about monuments. It isn't about, Washington Monument's great and the Lincoln Memorial is great and all that. But why you ought to care about Washington, D.C. and why it's such a great example of what we're about in this conference is it ought to be, it isn't, but it ought to be a living, breathing, real example of democracy. And I'm certainly going to fight every day I'm around to make that so, but we could certainly use your support as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mayor Williams, for those remarks. The mayor has graciously agreed to take some questions. So I'd like to set some ground rules. All questioners must identify themselves. We ask that you keep it to one question per individual. And to take a line from the dean, the best questions are brief and they end with a question mark. So please note that there are 2 microphones on the first floor and 2 on the second floor. So we'll start here.
Hi, I'm Ebony Bridwell Mitchell. I'm a MPP 99. I was former editor of the Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy, and now I'm working on my PhD at NYU. And I'm hoping I can make my question the intellectual query that it is and not a challenge to your leadership. But I'm curious about the point you made about, I guess, school board control and regional district control of schools. And it seems as if there are 2 options to fixing that situation. I definitely believe that there are some issues there. But one is to centralize authority, as people in New York and Chicago have done. And the other option is to decentralize and provide more flexibility and control to the principals, which seems to be the newer research and more grounded research in terms of Bill Uchi's work around actually providing student achievement. And I'm wondering what makes you choose to centralize things rather than decentralize as the best policy option.
I don't think that's
question mark?
No, I don't
Question
think
mark?
they're mutually exclusive, because I think that here the problem we have in Washington, D.C., for example, is we call ourselves giving the principals control. They don't have enough control over the actual management of their schools, and they have too much control over the standard setting in their schools. I mean, everybody agrees we ought to have common standards. We have exactly the opposite of what we ought to have. And the second thing I would say is you can't really exercise real freedom and autonomy down there at a local level if the main systems in the home office in Omaha, so to speak, aren't working right. And to get them working right, I think you need strong, focused leadership. And I would also argue that if you're talking about kids from the kind of circumstances that we're talking about, where you need a range of supports that need to be integrated to support these children, I think it does make sense to have the head of government responsible for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing the research you're doing. And you know what I also think is, I think this is true in some situations. I would never say that you need the mayor to control the schools in all situations. It's in a situation where things are broken to a certain point, and you know what I mean? Okay, yes.
My name is Dr. Ada Fisher. I'm from Salisbury, North Carolina, running for Congress next time. And
certainly wish you good luck.
Thank you. And been on a school board. But one of the challenges that I see, particularly in North Carolina and the South, where we're really losing jobs left and right, is the challenge of how do cities bring jobs in without selling the bond or without losing everything in these giveaways that they use to attract cities. And what will be the nature of work? Because I think that that is the big problem with education, et cetera, is where are people going to work and what kind of work, and should we socialize it? And that's one of the concerns.
Well, you know, again, I wouldn't pretend to be an educator, but what I hear is that present circumstances can certainly orient your teaching and elaborate your teaching, but you need to teach, everyone needs to understand, you know, the fundamentals of some kind of core curriculum and some core knowledge. So, for example, in my city, a lot of people are saying, well, we need to have vocational schools. You know, you can't work on a car now unless you understand math and you understand computer science. I mean, so yeah, you may have a technical orientation or a vocational orientation as people complete their high school, but they've got to complete, you know, basic courses. So I wouldn't look at it as a substitute. I just look at it as a way of presentation, orientation.
Hi, Mayor Williams. First of all, great to see you. Thanks for being here. My name is Chris Drake, and I'm a first-year student at Harvard Law School, just up the street here a little bit. And
Okay.
I'm originally from San Francisco, but I lived in D.C. for a little bit too, and it feels like, you know, one of my second homes. I had the honor and the privilege and the pleasure of being there. So, you know, thank you for making it the wonderful city that it is.
How's everything at the law school?
Sorry?
How's everything at the law school?
Oh, well, you know, it's all right.
Okay.
It's all right. Yeah, we're just plugging along up there, and
Okay.
yeah, can't complain too much. But here's my question. When I was living in D.C., and this kind of speaks to what you said at the very beginning of your talk about kind of putting D.C. on the map. And when I was living there, what I saw were kind of two versions of Washington, D.C. There was one that was the city version, and there was the other that was the federal version, or the capital of the United States. So what I'm wondering is, in terms of putting it on the map, how do you want your version of D.C. to be seen? Would you like people to think of it first and foremost as the city that it is, or instead as the capital, or would you like there to be some connection between the two? And then what would you do to make that happen?
Well, I'll give you one example of how I'm trying to bring all the three together. There are three cities in Washington, D.C. There's the international city, there's a federal city, and there's a local city. So the international city, people often forget, is we have the largest diplomatic delegation in the world in Washington, D.C. One of the reasons why I think we have a strong international real estate economy now and tourism is because I actually make it a point to speak to a lot of the ambassadors when they come to Washington, D.C. And everybody goes, why are you spending time with all those ambassadors? They don't live in the city, and da-da-da-da, and you know, chill. Because in my mind, my humble view of it is when they go back home, if they feel that they've been wanted and, you know, the local officials have really been accommodating to them, even though they don't pay for their parking tickets and all that, and I can't stand a lot of things that happen, if they go back to let's say they've gone back like Ambassador Masekela, who I've gotten to know, she goes back to South Africa, they go, well, how'd you like Washington, D.C.? She goes, oh, God, you can't, yeah. Well, who's going to, you know, that's a lot of people in her range, her sphere of influence are going to think, I don't want to invest in that city, whereas if she goes back and says, you know, great city, good people, that's worth a lot. That's an opportunity I have that no other mayor in the United States has, so I use that opportunity. Likewise with the federal government, a great example is President Bush and President Clinton. I was able to get a Hope 6 grant from President Clinton and then get a Hope 6 grant from President Bush. That's a very delicate adjustment, be able to work with two very different presidents, you know, and people say, well, what are you doing meeting with President Bush, and you should castigate President Bush, and one person was telling me, you should repudiate the First Lady and not sit with the First Lady at the State of the Union until we get voting rights to make a statement. I'm going, yeah, that statement would be heard for, what, 5 minutes? I mean, you know, what's important to me is, yes, we make a statement where we can really make a statement, but if by forging relationships, I can protect the district's budget way better than the other federal budgets. So for example, the district's budget and the president's budget's been held constant. All the other federal budgets been cut about 30%. You know, that's worth a lot to my citizens, you know, and to me, it's worth being criticized if I'm actually getting something out of it. And to give you an example, if I'm trying to pull all of them together briefly, is we have a major initiative called the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative where we're trying to revive our waterfront. To make a long story short, new baseball stadium we're trying to build would be located on this waterfront. And to just abbreviate, we've created a memorandum of understanding and a task force that involves all these different players at the federal level and the business level and the labor level and the local level, all together working on this waterfront initiative. Eleanor Holmes Norton's worked on this, a lot of local leaders and yours truly pulling it together, so it's been very successful. And that's, I think you get everybody together around a major focus. I would hope that education could be another way we could get everyone together. And I'm hoping that the superintendent will be able to do that. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor, and
Hi,
welcome.
how are you?
My name is Henry Colbrath. I am an alumni of the Kennedy School of Government, also a native of Washington, D.C. I've subsequently gone back to D.C. I'm a vendor for Child and Family Services, do a lot of business with D.C., in D.C. You mentioned this juxtaposition between style and substance. And I personally was raised in Detroit Park housing projects, very different profile from the profile I bring to Washington, D.C. now. And so I face on a daily basis with the youth that I work with through the organization that I provide services to Child and Family Services, I face that conflict and image crisis all the time.
Yeah.
Now that I wear the mantle of Harvard, all of a sudden Henry's not down anymore. And so it's a very difficult thing to deal with, and I know, again, being a native Washingtonian, I know the stereotypes that you have to deal with coming certainly after the Marion Barry era. You mentioned it as an issue, but I am curious as to how you reconcile it, because it is a very, or are you even concerned with the question? I mean, as you reflect on your legacy, when you leave Washington, D.C., if you ever would choose to do so, how would you say you have reconciled that issue, if it does indeed matter at all?
It hurts. I mean, there were cartoons of me that, one cartoon of me was I was on the escalator and there were all these people and I was going, oh my, I'm horrified by people and I sure hope they don't serve me any greens. And then there was another cartoon that I was the only African-American man in the United States who didn't like greens. And then it's compounded by the fact that I actually really don't like greens. But I'll give you a real-life example is I started out who I am, right? And it got me to the dance. Then all of a sudden everybody's saying, well, you need to change your this and change your that and change your look here and change your look there. And for a while I tried to change, and I went up to someone, and it was coming all like, hello, my brother, like that. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I just decided I can't do this. I'm not going to try. I'm just going to be who I am. And then being who you are, though, doesn't mean that, you want to be, one of the problems I have is that, when I was in school, I actually did my best studying in it would be like doing all your studying here in the forum during the day. I actually found I could study better with a lot of noise than I could in a quiet library, because every noise distracts you because it's so quiet, or else you fall asleep anyway. So I really had to focus here. So now, a lot of times I'm walking around town as mayor and I'm focusing on something, I'm thinking about something, but I'll walk off the elevator and some lady will say hi and I won't respond. Bad. That's really bad, because for the rest of her day, she's going to say, whenever you mention Tony Williams, well, you didn't say hi to me. Too good to say hi. See what I mean? So you need to respond to people, accept people, touch people in your own way, right? And I'm still trying to figure out how to do that right. People say I'm getting a little bit better at it, though.
We'll take one last question.
Yes, sir. My name is Daryl Cobbins. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. I was here this week for an
You have a
executive
great mayor
program.
down there. Do you like your mayor?
I like our mayor.
Yeah, he's a good mayor. We
bold
consider him a
man.
real leader, yeah.
Very bold. I was here this week for an executive program at the Kennedy School. Just thinking in terms of black political leadership on a national scale. This year, Tavis Smiley suggested that African-American leaders, both political and religious and otherwise, should create a covenant or a contract or an agenda that focuses on issues important to the black community, understanding that no one person has license on what's important. But he suggests that that covenant should be presented to Republicans as well as Democrats and responded to. And based on that, we decide, or individuals decide, where their votes should go. I just wanted to know your take on that proposition and any additional ideas you may have from a broad sense.
As I was saying in my remarks in terms of being more open, more skeptical, I think we need to be more ecumenical, skeptical, open to different approaches and look at what's in our long-term interests. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, first of all, when you're solving a problem, if you're really solving the problem, it really becomes less and less ideological as you actually start solving it. And when you're a mayor of a city or a local official in a city where you're at the lowest rung of the food chain, lady comes in the office saying, I want to speak to the lowest person in the office who actually is on top of this problem. I don't want to speak to some highfalutin person. I go, okay, I can help. She says, well, you're the mayor. I said, that's right, and I'm the lowest person in the government when you really think about it, right? Because you're really held, when you come to a community meeting, they hold you responsible for everything except the war in Iraq, and maybe even the war in Iraq. Everything they look to you for, you know what I mean? So you're right down there at ground level, and there's no Republican, Democratic way to pick up the trash or, do basic things in the government. I think we should be much more open and adroit about it, and I actually think we get better outcomes because of it. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you very much. What's your name? Thank you all very much. I'm going to Disney.
This concludes our program this evening. Thank you, Mayor Williams.
Okay, there's a reception following in Allison Dining Room. Allison Dining Room, Ms. Taubman. Alumni reception.